Prey is a title that definitely went under the radar. No, not that Prey, which was the Duke Nukem Forever before Duke Nukem Forever. I'm talking about Arkane Studios' Prey, the immersive sim that launched in 2017. And by under the radar, I mean just that. The number of players on PC is pretty terrible, as you can see. Is this the case of Arkane Studios making a terrible game right after the success of Dishonored? Let's take a look. Prey is a very interesting game to look at. On one hand, it's an Arkane game, but on the other, it's not. I don't know if thinking this after 35 hours of gameplay is good or not, to be quite frank, but let's not get ahead of myself. The premise of the game is that you play as Morgan Yu, a scientist working alongside your brother Alex. You wake up in your nice and cozy apartment and enjoy the scenery before departing to perform some tests for which you seem overly qualified, only for them to end suddenly when some very nasty aliens start wrecking shit up. But then you pull a Phil and wake up in the same cozy room, the same beautiful scenery to look at, or is it? Hey, what happened to that nice lady on the hallway? Hey, what's that sound coming from the room? Damn it, I need to get out of this room, I gotta break the window! Well, this ain't the first bamboozle the game's gonna pull up on you. You slowly realize that you're in the middle of what looks like an alien invasion while you're trapped on a research station far away from Earth, and you gotta find out what the hell happened. This sounds like the plot of Half-Life, you're not far off. Both games are set in remote research facilities with the player tackling some weird aliens. But the reality is that this game keeps throwing you curveballs and nothing is what it seems. You know, silent protagonists are something that I find awfully cliché, but this game switches it up by having the protagonist speak through recordings and the voice of a robot that assists you. It's a slightly weird experience, and it creates a feeling of distrust that you have inside of you towards everything the narrative throws at you. In short, you have been stuck into that Groundhog Day simulation for a considerable time, and the constant insertion and removal of Neuromods have more or less fried your memory. Neuromods are one of the most valuable resources in this world, giving any person having one the ability to instantly master anything. But their drawback is that removing one also removes any memory up to the point of its initial insertion. And now that the Typhons have attacked, you need to find out what happened and what can you do to survive. Assisting with this is January, the robot programmed by a past personality of yourself to help you blow up the entire station and wipe everything out. Hey, wait a minute, did I just say past personality? Yes indeed, it seems that not only Morgan's lost his memories, but his personality changed multiple times throughout his ordeal. This will surely not be in any way, shape or form relevant later on. Your opposition is not only the Typhon, but also your own brother, who's the one responsible for keeping you locked up into the simulation for God knows what reason. I'll try to keep this review spoiler free, so I won't give a lot of details throughout this video. Yes, on one hand there's a lot to talk about in regards of the story, and I wouldn't normally shy away from spoiling a game that's been released almost 4 years ago, but on the other, as I said, the game sold poorly, so actually not many people got their hands on it, thus I'd actually spoil the plot for those watching this, implying that my tiny channel will drive sales and make a difference. So for now, you'll have to be content with the knowledge that the story really pushes you to question everything that happens around you in a way that doesn't seem contrived or forced, something which also stands for the reveals or the twists that come up along the way. The way this game works is very interesting. I already said that it's an Arkane game and not at the same time, so let me explain. Arkane Studios delved into multiple genres over the years, but there are common things that you can expect out of them. They have stylish art direction, they have terrific animations, very engaging combat and great world building, and Prey is no exception on all those accounts. If you show this game to anyone who's familiar with Arkane's work from the past, it's very likely that they'll know it's made by the same studio. But when you play the game and interact with its design, it looks quite alien in comparison. It's an immersive sim, very different to Dishonored, and from my perspective, it's for the better. I liked some aspects from Dishonored, but I find it a flawed experience despite it being a very good game overall. In comparison, Prey is maybe one of the most tight-knit examples of the genre, avoiding many of its pitfalls in a very deliberate manner. For example, the level design is terrific, with the options that the game presents to the player made to feel organic at times because of how much they make sense. It took me hours until I realized some of the very small spaces were available to me only if I used an ability that allowed me to transform into a prop, for example, because in many cases I had a bunch of opportunities to approach things differently that seemed more obvious to my monkey brain. This is in stark contrast to how obvious the alternatives are made to the player in other immersive sims. The new Deus Ex titles are very sinful in this regard. The vents there are absolutely ridiculous and make it so obvious that it takes away all the joy of discovering new paths. In fact, they are so egregious that for a long time I played Prey assuming it's going to be the same and was very confused why I couldn't find convenient hidden entrances in every other room. It's a very nice feeling to unlearn bad habits. Another great quality of the level design is the way the entire space station is laid out. Throughout the playthrough, you're forced to move slowly from one section to the other because of how dangerous the typhons are, and it gives you the time to become aware of the sheer size of Talos 1. At one point you get the ability to exit the space station and move across different sections. It is then you realize that Arkane put a lot of thought into the layout of the levels because they make a lot of sense. They didn't have to make them so logical, and in fact many players might not even think twice about it, but they still did it nonetheless. The sections spent in zero gravity serve as an interesting change of pace. There's only one instance where it's close to outstaying its welcome, but overall I think they're a useful addition to the game. I can see why some people don't like the controls, but I don't mind the slow movement since you get to admire the beautiful scenery. Not only that, but it makes you feel like a very small pebble lost inside a very big clutter of stuff. Inside the station you walk through many huge rooms, but nothing gives you the same scale as the spacewalk sections. Seeing a huge space station with the moon, Earth and the sun in the distance is a humbling experience. And it's never too early to mention the game soundtrack made by Mick Gordon, so I might as well do it here. I'm gonna leave you a small tip. The guy's pretty talented, yo. Anyway, it's amazing how someone who made the soundtrack of the new Doom games, which we all know how awesome it sounds, also managed to make something like this, with calm sections, with tension. It's quite amazing, really. And ironic as it may sound, you really don't need to know who's the author of either of the soundtracks in order to know that they are quite similar in style. It's the subtle things. You need to listen to it and you'll see it, trust me. But before I continue, there is something I really have to talk about. I do a massive disservice to the game if I were to gloss over the fact that the artistic direction is absolutely gorgeous. The setting is in a retro science fiction set in an alternative world where JFK survives his assassination and so pushes on with a space race along a Soviet Union that didn't fall in the 90s. Well, the alternative history setting is one that strikes a particularly good chord with me, not only because I like them in general, but because of how well it reflects on the station's architecture. The space station you're in is actually a joint Soviet-American enterprise, and it shows up in its architecture and art. It's a testament to how well thought out everything about this is, when you find yourself staring at random posters on the walls because they managed to catch your attention so much. My fellow YouTuber The Summer of Mark did a very good job of describing this aspect of the game, and I highly recommend checking out his review if you want to listen to a more detailed and knowledgeable opinion over how much of a good job Arkane did in this aspect. He also watched Mad Men and is able to make some sick references about some mafia boss who liked drapes for a reason, I don't know. Another aspect that immersive sims tend to not handle well is that they tend to give the player too many gameplay mechanics at their disposal and fail to properly implement them to make them relevant, and Arkane are no strangers to this. Dishonored came up with a focus on stealth that was cancelled out by abilities that turned it into a walk in the park, and the liberties the player could take with combat abilities were in the end pointless because said abilities allowed for a quick slaughter of the AI opponents without any of the flashy moves you had at your disposal. Those two are my biggest gripes with that game, and you might wonder why I take so much time talking about it instead of Prey. Well, it's because here Arkane really made strides to improve things. For one, the stealth mechanics here are toned down, as if the devs realized that not only they couldn't make it work very well, but that it simply wouldn't fit with the premise of the story. You're a scientist trying to survive an alien invasion, not an assassin on a vigilante mission after all. There's not much to be said about the stealth. The most you can do is not to be spotted by enemies, which you do a lot early in the game. Because of this, your sensational vulnerability is amplified and makes the exploration a tense affair. The combat, on the other hand, is more of a focus. The melee combat is just as good as any other Arkane title. Smashing mimics, the game's shape-shifting headcrabs, with a wrench is extremely satisfying, and to make things better, it's something you'll do throughout most of the game. This is because mimics are everywhere and hide literally in the plain sight, since they have the ability to transform into any prop you can find. That will surely keep you very relaxed when you walk into an office space. The rest of the arsenal is no slouch either. They're really great to use and provide players with options galore, both in combat and exploration. The best part of it all is that the game pushes you to be really smart about approaching each encounter because of how weak and underpowered you are in the beginning and how hard it is to find ammo for your weapons. One thing that I have to say is that the shotgun is an absolute joy to use. That weapon is up there with the best examples of the FPS genre. A really big thumbs up from me in that regard. And coming back to the power level discussion, the feeling of helplessness you experience navigating the levels fits like a glove with the story and the atmosphere of Prey. Big parts of the playthrough are spent in a slow, methodical exploration of the station towards your objectives. Each room is dangerous, even the objects can be hidden mimics ready to ruin your day. And once you go outside the station, you'd think that things got easier, and you're wrong, because even stronger typhons are out there waiting to ruin your day. And later in the game you manage to fix the station's elevator. Well, now this is the safest route you can take, but the game still fucks you over just to show you who to call daddy. What an evil trick to pull off. Well, I have to confess something. I always enjoyed settings involving being trapped inside a building or a research station, but with a bunch of enemies going after you. I already mentioned Half-Life for doing the same thing, and I believe that part of its appeal came from that. Even if that game is a straight-up shooter, there's more suspense knowing that your back is against the wall, or that the only way out is to push forward against all the odds. It works for movies too. Die Hard and Dread use this kind of setting to a really great effect. So it really won't surprise anyone listening to me that I also like what I'm seeing in Prey, especially since here you're weaker than all the other protagonists from the examples I just gave. And here I can finally make my point about why this game doesn't feel like an Arkane title. Prey could very easily fit inside the System Shock or Bioshock series. Since I'm more familiar with the latter, there are multiple parallels that are obvious while you're playing. They're both set up inside a big metal can, one at the bottom of the sea, the other one on Earth's orbit. Both of them are places dedicated to a version of the human utopia that goes terribly wrong because they're both playing with their own versions of the fire. A key difference is that Alex in this game is a more fleshed out character compared to Andrew Ryan. The material you can find about him and the events of the story paints the image of a very complex human being. And while Prey doesn't have dramatic character introductions in the same way BioShock had, the world's inhabitants are used to further build the world around you. This is achieved through the many side quests the game has. With some exceptions, their design isn't anything more than go to X and then to Y and then collect your reward. But the main reason I'd recommend doing them is because how much flavor text and backstory they provide. The player still has to make moral choices from time to time, but their complexity is toned down compared to Dishonored, which is kind of a shame. Each audio log or email you read involves actual people who worked on the station, and it's quite impressive the lengths Arkane went to make them feel like real people and not just some names on a list. Their interactions are natural, and overall there is quite a bit to enjoy. Some of them even share the same fear of mimics hidden as regular objects and seem to handle it in the same way you do for most of the game. The level design also pulls its weight in this regard because it provides some serious doses of visual and environmental storytelling. When you encounter the looking glass technology, a reference that's so unsubtle there's no way it's just a coincidence, you can use its quirk to see things that you weren't supposed to. Seriously, use each video projected on those as an opportunity to sniff out extra information that the game would otherwise keep away from you. The sheer organic feeling of this design is quite something to behold, and even if the reward is just a couple of goodies most of the time, it's an extremely enjoyable thing to experience as a player. Reminder for all game developers that might listen to this schlock: do this kind of shit more often, please. Players enjoy finding out stuff using their intuition without any assistance from time to time. It's really rewarding. Please. The Neuromods I mentioned earlier also function as the game's main progression system. With them you can simply gain and upgrade various abilities, both human or Typhon origin. Some of them are more useful than others, but they provide an incredibly wide array of possibilities in gameplay, and are the main basis of the emergent gameplay that make Prey an immersive sim and not just a simple shooter. It also helps that there's a little bit of Metroidvania design into the levels, but thankfully there's not a lot of backtracking that you weren't doing anyway for completing quests. The later abilities become quite a bit expensive, but by that point it's not much of a problem because resources are aplenty. That is because of the one negative aspect of the immersive sims that Arkane was not able to avoid when designing this game, and that is the late game power creep. I mentioned that one of the big appeals of the early game is how on the edge you constantly feel because everything around you is stronger, faster, and you barely have any resources to patch yourself up. Well, by the later part of the game, all that is gone completely, and what used to be a tense walk from one section of the ship to another turns into your standard FPS cleanup. The phantoms that you either avoided or fought with large sacrifices earlier on now turn into 1-2 shot kills in the midst of a run and gun experience. The only exception to this is when you encounter telepaths or technopaths, which are more similar to boss fights really, but in the sense that they are more difficult and not because it would somehow bring back the feelings of dread and fear from the early game. It's not even that there's a slow progression towards this power level. For a quite significant portion of the game, you cannot craft any more Neuromods due to a DRM restriction quest, which to be honest is kind of funny. But once you finish that side quest, you can make over a dozen of them with the resources you hoarded for so long. It also doesn't help that by some point the game becomes very generous with the Neuromods you get to pick up. I wouldn't say it ruins the experience, but the quality of the late game fizzles out quite a bit because of this. Before I give my conclusion, there is one thing I want to mention that's been bugging me ever since I was recommended to pick this up. Prey didn't fail commercially because of its quality, that much is clear. And neither because of the accessibility of the genre, since immersive sims are quite mainstream stuff after all. It didn't even fail because it was launched in May, which is kind of a terrible month to launch a game actually. No, this game failed because of the branding and the marketing behind it, and my biggest beef is with the title itself. The history of the Prey IP is quite sad in retrospect. The original linear FPS was in development hell until its well-received release, and the sequel went into a similar development hell from which it never recovered before Bethesda cancelled it and gave Arkane the chance to make something out of it. I can understand the business mindset. Prey is a known brand, thus representing a lower financial risk, but in real world this doesn't make much sense. For the fans of the original game, the name implies a linear shooter, while for the regular video game fans of the time, the name is very much associated with the dozens of "the game has been postponed" articles that were very visible due to the hype surrounding both games. Because of this, when I heard that there's a Prey game coming up, I didn't expect it to be an immersive sim and just put it into the "yeah, whatever" pile. The worst part of this is that I bet many other people thought the same as I did. I mean, the game shouldn't have used this name as much as it fits the brand. The discrepancy between the expectation created by the IP's brand and the reality is just too much. This kind of screw-up is one of the many reasons I think Bethesda is actually a bad publisher. Therefore, my call to anyone watching this is to give the game a try, especially if you like immersive sims in general. This is a good game that offers a really interesting experience for the most part of the time you spend with it. You can buy it on Steam for $30, and while I think it's quite a lot for a game released so long ago, it provides a lot of hours of enjoyment while finishing a playthrough, and is also quite replayable because you have so many ways to approach the tech tree. If you still don't feel comfortable paying this much, the game has steep discounts from time to time. And with this being said, thanks for watching this video. I know you enjoyed it if you got to this part, therefore go hit the like and subscribe button right now, because otherwise you'll miss my future content. I can't promise a rough schedule since I'm still learning the ropes of figuring out the good workflow, but I certainly have a couple of ideas in store for future games I want to cover. Until next time, cheers!